Good evening and welcome to the World Affairs Council of Western Michigan's live stream broadcast of Policing in a Global Context with ex-CIA Officer Patrick Skinner, who is now a member of the Savannah, Georgia Police Department. I'm Michael Van Denen, and I am the Executive Director of the World Affairs Council of Western Michigan. On behalf of my colleagues, Erica Kubik and Emily Smith, and the Board of the Directors of the Council, I welcome you this evening. Thank you for adjusting with us as we program responsibly during this time of COVID-19. We hope that you will stay safe and that you will show grace to those in your community. The Council's mission is to empower the people and organizations of Western Michigan to engage thoughtfully with the world. We do this with the help of 50 local companies and 11 educational partners and many community members. Together, we seek to provide programming that is credible, that is objective, relevant, civil, and compelling. To change the world, we believe, you first must know the world. And you can learn more about what we do at worldmichigan.org. Our format today is straightforward. We'll hear about policing from Detective Skinner, and then we'll open things up for questions from you. You may use the comments section in the YouTube window, or you can text them to 616-308-6560. And we ask you to remember the House rules of the Council, which is to ask your questions respectfully and succinctly. Let me introduce Patrick Skinner to you. He was our guest before in 2016. And he says it was at that gathering in Grand Rapids that he was struck with the idea to leave the think tank he was then at and then join a local police department. And he soon did so in his hometown of Savannah, Georgia. Since 2017, Patrick Skinner has worked with the Savannah, Georgia Police Department, first as a beat cop and now recently as detective. He is a former CIA case officer with extensive experience in source handling and source networks, specializing in counterterrorism, both in Afghanistan and Iraq. After leaving the CIA, he worked as the director of special projects for the Sufan Group. In addition to his intelligence experience, he has law enforcement experience with the Federal Air Marshal Service and the U.S. Capitol Police, as well as the search and rescue experience that he had in the U.S. Coast Guard. You can follow him on Twitter at @SkinnerPM, and he has ties to Grand Rapids, and that his Aunt Carol is a local preservationist, and she has worked to revitalize Wealthy Street and the Wealthy Theater, and she's now currently working on an exciting new project in the historic old Third Reformed Church on Diamond and Hermitage on the north side. Patrick Skinner, welcome, and we are so pleased you're going to join us with this conversation. We want to hear from you for your expertise and experiences. Patrick, thanks.
Hey, thank you very much for having me. It's my second time speaking for you guys. And like you said, the first time was 4.5 years ago. Actually, it was my birthday. I turned 45 then. And I came up because my aunt lives there and I wanted to speak to a group of just people that wanted to not just know about stuff, but maybe change stuff. And like you mentioned, it was I didn't really realize it at the time, but I'll get to a quick bio. I'm the most boring thing about me, but I have been around interesting people. And so I think that I watched that video later on and I could see me talking about local issues. And I was really impressed with Grand Rapids, and still am, about how they were kind of grounded and they seemed to be working well locally. And I kind of was just juxtaposing that against the chaos I was seeing because the talk was about ISIS and this big threat, and it's still a huge threat, and the problems that led to that haven't gone away. But I started talking, and I could see during the talk that I was not really saying it out loud, but that I was sensing that the answers that I was struggling with were local. And so it's like I decided, to make a bad decision and become at the time a 46-year-old rookie cop in my hometown. Never thought I would be here. I left the agency because my dad was dying of Alzheimer's. I had a great job with the Sufan Group. I'm still affiliated with them. They're great people. Ali Sufan's a remarkable person. But I decided I wanted to focus on the things that I could change. And it sounds kind of hippie-ish, but maybe it is. But all these issues that I was focusing on, I couldn't touch. I was focusing more on Afghanistan and Iraq and Syria and places I hadn't been to in a long time. But I couldn't tell you what was happening down the street. So it started to bother me. And I felt like a fraud, and because I probably was. And so I decided I wanted to make a change. And here we are. And so what I've done in the last 4 years, a couple months, I guess, with the Savannah Police Department is, one, I'm not speaking for the department. I don't represent them. I'm just speaking as Patrick Skinner now, which I barely speak for myself. But tonight I want to talk to you guys about how I see not just local policing here, but local policing overseas, and more importantly, the absence of good local policing, which by definition has to be empowered by the consent of the community. The absence of that is what leads to ISIS. I mean, the absence or the opposite of good policing is either no policing or fascist policing, you know? And I mean, we use the word here a lot, and there are some troubling issues in American policing, of course. But overseas, I mean, I'm talking, you know, the Assad regime, that sort of stuff. And so I want to talk quickly. It's about 30 minutes. It'll be the best 30 minutes of your life. Quickly about how, not just what I saw overseas, is how I'm trying to work here. And I'm not alone at all. I mean, I had great colleagues that trained me as a local police officer. I still work with all of them. I just have maybe a slightly different viewpoint just because of some slightly different experiences, but I'm hardly unique at this. So there are people in every community doing what I do. In fact, there are people in my community doing what I do and better. I just have a bigger Twitter feed because my cat's really mean. And so what happens was I decided to become a 46-year-old beat cop, a rookie cop. And so being a CIA case officer sounds really cool, but it doesn't really matter when you're a 46-year-old beat cop. You're a rookie. And I was, and I still am a rookie. I still have less than 4 years on. I learn stuff every day. But what I'm increasingly learning, and I am now employing, and then now encouraging other people to see it the same way, is that what I was doing overseas as part of the war on terror, I now see us doing, and we have been doing for a generation, in a war on crime. And I wrote in the Washington Post right after the George Floyd thing that I fought the war on terror. You know, I played a small role in that, like a lot of people did. And I was able to see how destructive that was and is. And the cost of that we're still dealing with. And other countries we were messing with or in are still dealing with it much more severely than we are. So I saw the consequences of a war on terror, and wars make monsters of us all. And then I realized we're now doing a war on crime. Now, the war on crime actually has predated the war on terror, at least semantically, in the government. You know, it started with Nixon, war tough on crime, et cetera, et cetera. But starting in the late 90s, and then certainly right after 9/11, we started seeing the militarization of police. And I don't mean that as a metaphor. I mean police dressed, equipped, and increasingly trained as warriors, as soldiers. And then if you have soldiers, then you have to have civilians, and that becomes everybody who's not police. Now, is it as dire and black and white as that in every aspect? No. Are some of the things I'm going to talk about well-intended? Yeah, most of them are. But they're well-intended, but they're still catastrophic. They're still misguided, at least in my humble opinion, because what they're doing is they're creating a gulf, a difference between us and them, because there is no difference. And that's what I saw when I started speaking at the World Affairs Council in 2016. I realized I was dancing around the edge of that. And then I watched the video later on because I'm vain and narcissistic, and I realized that I was doing that. And I could see that I was just about to touch what I thought was not the answer, because I firmly believe there is no answer. In fact, you don't solve life. There are no solutions. There are just sustainable ways to approach it, you know, to handle these challenges, which we should do every day. And I realized that the task force mentality, the surge mentality, if you will, that I was a part of in 2007, 2008, 2009 in the Middle East, that surge mentality where things are going really bad and you want to go in quickly and do something really to make it not as bad. We do that here at crime. Crime happens, it flares up, and we do a task force. I understand that, and in the short term, that's probably appropriate. But when you start to rely on that, you start to have a warrior mentality. You start to have police forces that are equipped, trained, and increasingly acting like they are a part, a thin blue line, if you will. And so I'm going to talk about that. Overseas in Afghanistan, when I was there for a couple of years. There was no local government. I mean, the local government is very tribal. There was no strong government. The absence of government is what was causing a lot of problems. So the U.S. spent a lot of time, a lot of money, a lot of effort, a lot of lives, mostly Afghans, also coalition, trying to build local polices. They were called the Afghan, they still are, Afghan National Police, ANP. And then you had the ALP, the Afghan Local Police. Then you had a bunch of variations of the themes where the military, the U.S. military, the coalition, NATO, were trying to train and equip local police forces. And I'll say that again, the military, and they still do it, are training local police forces because their mission was counterterrorism, because these are insurgencies after a while. And of course, it didn't work. If training and equipped worked, then Iraq wouldn't have fallen apart in 2014. It doesn't work. It never has. But because it's the only thing we knew, so we kept trying it, and we still try it. Because the issues are, once you make this militarized police force, or in other places, or a lot overseas, there is no difference between the army and the police. There is no difference between the military, the CIA, the police. It's all a government. Certainly in less democratic countries will say that. We have a big separation here between the military and the police, big separation between the CIA and the military, or should. And even though they're fraying right now, it's still a treasured thing. It's what's keeping us from the cliff, I guess. But other places, they don't have that. And so I saw that very, very clearly. I could see everything we were doing made it worse, made it much worse, because we were arming people, telling them to then police themselves, but we were basically teaching them to be the military, and that their neighbors, which I'll get to that point in a second, were part of a larger pool of suspects, maybe, or targets, if you will. Certainly the way we viewed it. And we would we would say winning hearts and minds. I mean, I'm pretty sure we used that in the Vietnam War, pretty sure we tried that in every war we've ever done. Doesn't really work very well. We use the word, and so we were fooling ourselves. We fooled ourselves in Afghanistan. We fooled or deluded ourselves in Iraq, where it's the same thing. We went through the surge to buy time for a solution, a political improvement, a social improvement, a religious improvement, whatever it is you want to call it. That didn't happen. So we bought time for something that didn't happen. So we just bought time at immense cost for all involved. And then what you were left were these police forces, these local police forces, heavily armed and increasingly unaccountable. In Afghanistan, we call them militias, and now in Iraq, you call them militias, except they're going to be Iranian-influenced militias. And now in America, we start using the word militia. I mean, it's odd. And so I saw that my least favorite thing about being in the CIA was that. I loved the case officer part of being a CIA officer. That was what I loved. It's not like in the movies. I wish it was. I wish I was that cool. It's mostly finding out somebody's motivation to talk to you. We don't use, yes, torture I had nothing to do with that. That was before my time. But for case officers, it is one-to-one rapport-based elicitation is what you're going to call it. I'm going to get you to talk to me because I can help you with whatever your motivation is, revenge, money, whatever it is. Sometimes, and a lot of times, people overlook it, but people want to do something bigger than themselves. It's literally why anyone joins a group, except for I don't want to be bored. And so even in Afghanistan, young, smart people, men and women, don't want to waste their lives. And so you could connect with these people. I didn't call them terrorists because I wanted them to work with me. And so that was my favorite part of the job, was to understand people's motivation. And I mean, point to point, intensely personal, connect. That was my favorite part of the job. My least favorite part of the job was the whole reason why we were doing all that, especially in the counterterrorism center. Wasn't disillusioned, but it just wasn't my favorite part of the job. I liked connecting with people. I leave, I take care of my father, who dies of Alzheimer's or early dementia. And then I luck into some work. I'm working with a Sufine group, and I'm very lucky, still fortunate to be associated with them. And I'm helping governments and corporations handle these massive problems. And I'm seeing that most of the massive problems stem from the absence of good local government. And then one of the biggest reflections of that is the absence of good local policing, which I had a law enforcement background, kind of. I mean, the agency is not military, but I was in the Coast Guard, which is search and rescue, but I did measure lobsters. So we did a lot of boardings. I mean, it counts. But then I was a U.S. Capitol Police officer during 9/11, Air Marshal because I like to shoot. And that was a weird job, had a bag of books. It would be much easier now with an iPad or a Kindle. So I had very superficial federal law enforcement experience, which is not the same as being a cop. And so I was living here, and I started seeing, when I wasn't traveling overseas to places that needed help, or when I wasn't going up to New York to work on bigger issues about problems overseas, I was walking around my neighborhood, and I started seeing that everything that I was writing about that we could never possibly achieve. I mean, we couldn't, like, hey, Skinner, how do you fix Aleppo? I don't know. I mean, well, no one can, but just even asking that starts to be problematic because you start to try to answer that question. And I started realizing we were trying to do things that were so big and so massive overseas when we couldn't do 1/1000th of it right here at home with home field advantage and unlimited time. And it started grinding on me, where I was trying to say, like, I'm focused on a terrorist group, if you will, which is just a criminal network. It's an organization, just like gangs. Here we call them gangs. Overseas, it can be called terrorism. There are differences, but not for this presentation. And so I just started realizing I couldn't tell you what was happening 3 blocks from my house. And it started to annoy me. And I don't like to be annoyed. I take the path of least resistance. And so the path of least resistance was an incredibly difficult path for a very out of shape 46-year-old. So then I won't bore you, but I did notice, so I had gone through, right before 9/11, I went to the FLETC, the Federal Law Enforcement Training Center down in, actually, Brunswick, for the U.S. Capitol Police. And this was before 9/11. And it's the basic level. It's literally the baseline of you need to get certified to be a federal law enforcement officer. And it was great. It was a really good training. It was fun. I liked it a lot. I go through a state version of that in 2017 here in Georgia again, but it's the state level, but it's the same exact thing. It's, instead of focusing on federal law, focus on state law, but it's basic apprehension, criminal law, defensive tactics, shooting, driving, the basics of law enforcement. And I immediately saw the big difference between what I remember being trained in before 9/11 and then what I was seeing in 2017. Where terrorism had kind of infected the way that the policing was done, because yes, there is a terrorist threat. There is, yes, it's minuscule, but yes, it exists. I'm not denying that. But the arming for that war on terror, the stuff we were buying for that basically was turning all training, the most basic training, again, I'm not talking my advanced training, I'm saying basic training, as like SWAT light. And SWAT, that's for very specific things. There's a hostage, there's a guy with a gun. Well, now we're trained, everybody has a gun. And of course, in America, most of the time, everybody does have a gun. That doesn't mean they're a threat, but they certainly have a gun. And so I just noticed it. It didn't really bother me, but it was really eye-opening. I was like, wow, that's, I was focused on trying to do push-ups. I was out of shape. I was in great shape before, 18 years later or whatever, not so much. And so, but I just noticed it. And then I become a rookie cop, and I live in my jurisdiction, and I live right down the street from my old precinct. Used to be able to get to work in 4 minutes. Now I can get to work in 9. And so I went to work, and I started with a training officer, and I immediately understood that some of the things that I learned or experienced, or some of the things I did as a case officer with the agency, it wasn't that they had application here. It was that the fact that I didn't have to do all those things made, and I'll explain, this job so much easier. And so a quick example, for the first, 12 weeks after you become a police officer, you ride along with a training officer, at least 12 weeks. And so we're driving, all the cops have little MDTs, because we can't call them laptops, mobile data terminals. We have to have an acronym. And so you get dispatched to a 911 call. It makes an alert, goes, and you are, just domestic violence, somebody with a gun, a robbery, whatever it is. It's always something usually dumb. And so I would look down, I go, oh, that's cool. And I would read the details of the call, which are usually wrong, but they're quick. They're, because somebody calls 911 and that person who answers the phone is called the call taker. They work for 911. They are not the person who dispatches the police, unless it's a really small department. We have, 600, 700 sworn officers. Savannah's a high crime, southern violent town. And so the call taker takes a 911, types up a synopsis, man beats wife still on scene. Literally, that's what you'll see. And then they'll send it to the dispatcher, who then sends it to your computer and then tells you over the radio at the exact same time. So you have a printout or a computer screen of the same thing you're hearing on there. And I was just, I wasn't driving in the beginning, because rookies don't drive for the first couple of days, I guess, even though I'm from here. And so I scrolled down and looked at the bottom of the screen, and I could see, I was like, hey, what's this number? It says Barbara, 912-555-1212, whatever it is. And my training officer, who was really good, or one of them said, that's a person who called 911. And this was like day 2. And I just went, huh. I was like, that is so cool. And I took my I got over my fear from the agency and had a cell phone. I was all proud of myself. And it wasn't a track phone. I actually had a phone. And so I just called. And in the beginning, they said, hey, you should block the number, because, otherwise those people have your number. It's your personal number. I don't have a city work phone. I was like, okay. And so I blocked the number. And of course, no one answered the phone, because nobody, even in 2017, answers block calls. So after the first 2 or 3 times that happened, I was like, unblock. There are apps you can use to disguise numbers, but I'm too lazy to do that. So I just called and said, hi, I'm Officer Skinner. I'm heading your way. I'm reading the screen, and it says that there's some trouble. Are you okay? I'll be there in 3 minutes. Tell me what's going on. And usually, you can get there in 90 seconds, maybe a couple minutes. And it was just, and for the most part, the information was enlightening in the fact that it was almost always less dramatic than it seemed. Sometimes it was more dramatic than it seemed, and you would be like, everybody speed up. But for the most part, it told you to slow down. Something had happened. It wasn't happening. And so I would just say, oh, okay, hi, I'm Officer Skinner, Savannah Police. Heading your way, Miss blah, blah, blah. I see that this is going on. Is he still there? Are you safe? Okay, he has a gun. Where is he standing right now? He's outside. Okay, whatever the call was, I would just quickly do what I thought was, and it is my job. I would get the basic information, and then I could immediately tell the radio, instead of playing that game of really dangerous, high consequence telephone operator, I would just say, hey, blah, 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 this is happening. Don't drive up to the front door, or whatever it is, or we don't need, we'll take this by ourselves, whatever the call was. And so, and it was immediately, because in the agency, to make that phone call, I would have had to done a 3-hour surveillance detection route. I would have had to use multiple phones. I wouldn't have used a phone, but we wouldn't use phones anyway. But for the example of this story, I would have had to bounce things off satellites. I couldn't have made it a attributable phone call. And I certainly wouldn't have said, hey, I'm Patrick Skinner from the CIA. I'm coming to talk to you. But here in this job, not only did I get to do that, it just seemed crazy not to. Because everyone else was worried about people getting to know you. And I was from a job where no one ever knew you. I mean, the power of my old job was they really didn't know you, and you could just go in and out as a well-intended tourist, sometimes with bad consequences, but usually not. And so but here in this job, I get to get out of the car, and not only did I not have to do a surveillance detection route, but my damn name is on my shirt, my real name. It's not an alias. This is, hey, Patrick Skinner is written on my name. And actually where I work is on my chest. And I felt like Superman, not because I had all this power of the police, but because I had the power of connection. And it was so eye-opening. I'll just say that it happened very fast. Within a couple days, I was just like, huh, like I spent a lot of time getting close to people superficially with an agency. Was it superficial? Yes. Was it effective? Yes, very much so. But here I can do the same thing, but I can even use my real name and maybe not so superficially. And so that's just one small example. It did something else though. It allowed me to, and I mentioned this in one of the Washington Post op-eds, that these things we go to, these calls, you never really know what they're going to, and they always are chaotic. And I always use the word dramatic. Are they violent? Sometimes. Is there a hint of violence? Usually, this is America. There's always a hint of violence. But they're always loud, and they're really, really fast, and they're very, very loud. I cannot just tell you how you come out on a domestic scene and everyone's screaming at you. And what it allowed me to do, at least for myself, was it bought me time. Instead of racing like an idiot for the 90 seconds and then me doing something and then say, I didn't have any time to think, I was like, no, I have 90 seconds. I have 90 seconds. I'm going to slow it down. And 90 seconds is an infinite lifetime. And I get really passionate about this because Tamir Rice would not have been shot if the police had called. How about that? I'll just flat out say that. Because the call was, if they'd called the person who called 911, that guy would have said, yeah, it's a BB gun. I think it's a BB gun. Because he told that to the dispatcher. That information didn't get relayed or didn't get picked up or perceived or rated. And so I said, I'm not doing that. And no, if there's a number, I'm calling. So I still do. And when I was a training officer, I said, I can't make you do this, but yeah, I'm going to make you do this for the next 3 weeks. You're riding with me. And so it gave us clarity. And it gave us the one thing we always said: we didn't have enough time. Now, our job is difficult, but a lot of jobs are difficult. And we always say we didn't have enough time. Things happen instant. In fact, we even say, and they're even trained, there's no time to think. If you stop to think, you're dead. And I'm like, what kind of job is this where you're being trained? If you stop to think or second guess yourself, even better, you're dead. And I'm like, I should second guess myself, or my neighbor's dead. And or maybe we can kind of find this difference. And so this happened, and I'm talking a week. I was just starting to realize, like, hey, I think this is an interesting way. Not that I had a better way, and I know stuff that I didn't know anything that anyone didn't know, and it wasn't better. I was just slower because I was like, I can get 90 seconds out of any call. I can be ahead of you for 90 seconds. And then it also did something else. When I stepped out of these calls, and it's hot and I'm sweaty, and God, I'm sweaty. I'm disgusting. And so hopefully people would take pity on me and go, oh God, this naked mole rat is sweaty. Let's stop the violence. But that usually didn't work. So I would step out and I would say, hi, I'm Officer Skinner. We just spoke. And whoever I spoke to, they looked at me with it wasn't a relief. I'm not gonna make it like a TV movie. There was not relief. Sometimes there was, but there was a connection. And man, that's all I want. It bought time, and at least they can focus on me, because sometimes they're not very happy to see me. I can't imagine why. And so it bought time, but it also made a connection. It really did. I'm not lying. We just spoke because I got to say something true. At that moment, that is a true statement, because I honestly don't know what's happening. That also is true, but we just spoke. And so focus on me. If you're going to do some violence, do it towards me. Don't do it towards your neighbor. Do it towards me. And for the most part, they just turned and focused and started screaming at you, or they wanted you to help by screaming at you. Whatever it is, I'm happy. Scream at me all you want. And then it did something else. It gave them my phone number. Instead of me hiding my phone number, in the old job, I would have hid my name. I couldn't say I worked for the CIA. I had to make up 1,000 different ways, some of them really clever. Because that was the power of the job, was in the deniability. And I very quickly understood the power of the old job was resources, leverage, but deniability. The power of this job is accountability, and not just accountable from a department standpoint, which is important, or from a community standpoint, which I'll talk about, which is important, but from an individual, me. I'm accountable because my name is right here. I work here, so I step out of the car. And so at the end of whatever it was, and sometimes it's dramatic, and some people are very insistent. We try to deny people their trauma, but sometimes people are insistent on going to jail or whatever it is. And, there is a lot of violence. But they had my phone number. I'm not changing my phone number. And I'm not telling them don't ever call me again. I sometimes wish, but I would say, hey, if this happens again, or if anything like this, if this, call 911. But if you need anything else, or if you just want to talk, or whatever it is, call Skinner. And that's exactly what I said. And I have business cards now because I'm fancy pants. But back then I didn't. They just had my number because I had actually called them. And I had their number. And so I would save their number. I'd say beat 34 or whatever beat I was in, 33. And I would use their name. And sometimes I would put their address or whatever it is in my little contact list. And by the end, I mean, within a year of doing that, I had 250 phone numbers from people in a beat. I mean, it was ridiculous. And I could literally call up and say, hey, did you just hear gunshots? Or, hey, did you see a car drive by? But then it did something more, because that one little thing was just emblematic of what I was see how to do the job. It connected me to my neighbors in a real way. And I'm going to talk about this real fast. I'm using the word neighbors very deliberately, very deliberately. Now I do it deliberately unconsciously, because it sounds weird if I don't use it. And then I realize how much I say it. When I'm talking like this, I'll realize I just said neighbor like 5 times. And it's like, you know, Mr. Roger with Tourette's or something. And I don't mean to be that way. But I will say that Mr. Rogers did not have a lot of use of force allegations. But I started using the term neighbors because it's true. And again, it's the opposite of what we're trying to do overseas with this war and what we're trying to do here with the war on crime. It's true. I live here. I'm not an invading army, and I'm not temporarily surged to my neighborhood. I live in East Savannah. Ooh. And you know, it's tough. But I live here. And so the people that I'm interacting with on a professional, like as a police officer, are literally my neighbors. They're not a metaphor. They're not us versus them. It's like Julia and Steve next door. And I see people all the time that I've arrested. And I will say there are a lot of reasons why you should live where you police. I don't know how you can mandate that. We don't have kids, so you know, when there are massive issues with schools, and I get that. I mean, I don't speak for other people. I don't think that I should make people you should. If I was a chief of the United States Police, which is a thing, right? I wouldn't say you have to live where your community is, but I would encourage communities to encourage that. How about that? I would make it easier for communities to have not just cops, but teachers and plumbers. And I mean, I just would encourage smaller neighborhoods, but that's a different issue. And so, but what it does is, if it does nothing else, it certainly puts you in check. How about that? Let's just say that you're probably not going to be real mouthy and it's kind of like a punk as a police officer if you see that guy at the gas station like an hour later off duty, you know. I mean, and so there are real safety issues, I guess, with, you know, people targeting police. Yes, I'm not naive, but I've also done dangerous jobs before, and I'm not scared of my neighbors because again, they are my neighbors. And so what I started doing was I just started calling them my neighbors. Like, wow, instead of calling them, you know, citizens, which is fine, I guess. Certainly not going to say civilians because I'm a civilian too, or whatever they are. I was going to call them my neighbors because that's true. And so, and then I started doing it in my reports, which caused some issues, but it survived a lot of court challenges, I guess. But because it's true, and so I started realizing and a lot of people do it. I just put maybe words to it. That the warrior mentality is a result of training for war. The training for war is because we've decided to fight a war. We still have a war on terror, which is a war on a tactic, and then we have a war on crime, which is a war on a fact of nature that you don't want to tolerate, but you certainly can mitigate. And so everyone in the immediate aftermath of the George Floyd murder or police killing, unjustified, was that people were saying, oh, it's a failure of training. And that was why I wrote the first op-ed. I was lucky enough to get a chance to do that. And the Washington Post I said, no, it's not a failure of training. It's the result of that training. It is literally the logical result of training for 20 years. It's us versus them. Sheepdogs versus sheep. Well, I'm not a sheepdog because my neighbors aren't sheep. And I refuse to use these terms because what you say is what you think, and what you think is what you do. And the police have awesome powers. I mean, just immense powers. And most of the time we really shouldn't use them. And so I started realizing that the neighborhood mindset and the neighbor mindset was, I mean, just staggeringly, at least for me, you know, I'm an anecdote machine. I'm not an analyst, never was. I was not smart enough for that. But from my perspective, and from the last almost 4 years doing it every single day, the neighbor mindset, one, it doesn't cost anything, and it costs a lot not to do it, I think. But it just, one, it's a better way to work. Personally, you're not so angry. You're not always worried that someone's going to kill you. I mean, are people going to kill you? Yes, but not at every second do you have to keep it's like and so I remember in the Cheney Doctrine, which Vice President Cheney early in the War on Terror, yay, War on Terror, remember that word? The Cheney Doctrine was, if there was a 1% chance that a mass WMD attack or terrorist plot was possible, not even probable, but possible, you treated it as probable, as almost a certainty. And so if there's a 1% chance that Iraq had WMD, then it's a 100% chance, and we're going to treat it that way. And then you just extrapolate that, keep going on and on and on. And then police training is the same way. It's not just that anybody can kill you at any time, it's that they want to. That this old woman, if I sit down next to this woman and hug her, she's going to pull out a chainsaw and cut my head off. And I was just like, well, yeah, I mean, I guess that could happen, but I think I'll take my chances on the 99.99999% of the time that it won't happen. And I could probably do my job a lot better and certainly help my neighbors more. And then I'm going to wrap this up real fast, but I started doing something else, a couple other things actually. But again, I'm not unique. I put a lot of thought into this. I told people this is the most deliberate thing I've ever done. And it is. I'm very deliberate because I'm lucky. And so I realized that you strip away all the things, all the reasons why you want to be a police officer, or you want to serve anybody, you want to help anybody. I mean, from religion to government to non-government, whatever it is. You strip away the thing. And I think that a good reason is that I'm lucky, and I need to leverage my luck. And so what I started to do is I want to help other people leverage their luck, because most of my neighbors haven't had 2 lucky days in a row. And I've repeated that because it's true. I mean, I'm self-effacing, sure, but I'm also very, very acutely aware of how lucky I've been. And this job has made me very aware of how lucky I have been. And I mean, yes, white privilege, you can, all that. Yes, I mean, as a white Southern police officer, I am the least persecuted person on the planet. And I mean, people are like, oh, it must be tough to be a police officer. I'm like, no, it's not. I'm sorry, it's not. It's tough to be anything else. How about that? The history of a white Southern police officer, you know, is not one of persecution. How about that in the U.S.? Let's just be honest with that. But more than that, I was healthy in luck. I mean, I was lucky in health. I had good health. I was lucky, like my car didn't break down on the way to the CIA interview, and I was lucky that my parents had opportunities and they worked. I mean, I was lucky to have 2 parents, or 2 people that love me, and so just in every single way. And I'm not like diminishing hard work, but what I seen as a local cop was a lot of people work hard. I mean, a lot of people work harder than me. And yet, you know, you're supposed to buy me coffee, but this person, no. And I get the well-intendedness, but I've kind of moved past the well-intended, and I want us to do things. So I'm going to close it real fast with something that I've approached, and I started doing it as a training officer. And I mean, like training that with my department, because I'm very aware of the power of the state. I've had the power of the state in various forms, and sometimes awesome forms, and I still have it now. A lot of times I see my job as to protect people from the power of the state, but I understand that. And I understand that my job is to not bring the drama. So what I came up with was, and I do it, and I still do it, and I do it at every call. Now, as a fancy pants detective, I still do it with every engagement with my neighbors. And it's this: if you didn't have a badge and a gun, how would you handle this 911 call? Or how would you handle this police call? Whatever I could come up with that was safe, ethical, legal, and kind, that was a really important part, I would try that first. And because if I went in relying on a badge and a gun, I was probably going to have to rely on one of them. And I didn't want to do that. And so I don't. And so it just, once you realize that Yeah, should police have guns in America? God, yes, because everybody and their mother has guns. I'm not going to get into gun control. I don't even know what that would look like anymore. But what I was doing was I would approach these, I would go to these calls, and these calls are really frustrating or really even sometimes scary. Ooh. But most of the time they're very loud, and we are required to make decisions. And so I was saying, how would I handle this call if I didn't have a badge and a gun? And I would go from there. And if it was this person needed a ride, we probably gave them a ride. If it was me not saying anything, I didn't say anything. If it was me just separating something, whatever it is. And so I'll end this real fast, but if I could spread a message, it would be, if I didn't have a badge and a gun, if you didn't have a badge and a gun, how would you, the police officer, handle this police call? Whatever you come up with that's not mean and illegal, and it should be transparent and it should be ethical and legal, try that. Try that. Stop telling people what to do. I see a lot of issues where the police have, and I'm sure I've done it, unintentionally, I guess, just like everybody, I guess, but where the police get focused on compliance. I'm going to end with this real fast because I'm pretty good at timing, but I get passionate about this. I wasn't passionate about ISIS 4 years ago, boo, but this I care about. This, I live here. But so the police in America are focused on compliance. I tell you to do something and you have to do it. It's called a legal order. If a police gives you a lawful order, you have to. You don't get to say no. And so that leads to a lot of problems because in my little limited experience, and I mean, I've dealt with a lot of violent people. Luckily, I have bigger friends. But, some people aren't going to do what you tell them. And there's nothing. And some people, they're going to be violent. I mean, there's nothing you can do about that. But I'm not dealing with the 1%. I'm dealing with each call individual. At that time, I'm going to handle that call. And I stress again and again and again, compliance cannot be the goal for the police. The goal of the 911 call is whatever it should be. Each one is separate. You go there, and is it a traffic accident? The goal is probably to move the cars out of the road and make sure everyone's okay and give insurance. Police shouldn't do traffic accidents, by the way. But, for property theft or whatever it is, the goal is to handle that call in the least amount of drama. The goal is not compliance. I can't stress that enough. The goal cannot be compliance. I can't when you see uses of force where the only charge is obstruction, that usually means that the police have kind of made their own crime. Now, that doesn't mean it all the time. Sometimes people, they do frequently freak out and get violent. But for the most part, I've come up with this. If I don't think you can handle a lawful order in that moment, I'm probably not going to give it to you. If you're not hurting yourself, hurting someone else, or like dancing in traffic or something insanely dangerous, man, I'm going to let you do it for a little bit. I'm not going to tell somebody who can't shut up to shut up. I'm not allowed to use that word anyway. My wife would kill me. And it's rude. But I'm not going to tell someone to sit down who can't. I'm not going to tell someone to stop waving their hands around who can't. Because as soon as I tell them to do that, they have to do that. And I'm not going to get into the repeating game where I tell you to do something, you don't do it. I'm going to ask you to do it. I'm going to tell you to do it. Then we're going to make you do it. And that is where force is used. And so I'm increasingly realizing that you can't avoid all force. Of course not. I mean, you can't. There is, danger lurks among us. But I can make sure that it doesn't come from me. I can make sure that it's not just justifiable. I don't like seeing that this was a justifiable use of force. This was a justifiable shooting. Because that's the lowest bar. That literally says this was legal or within policy. That's the lowest bar. And it's a good bar to meet. You want to meet the lowest bar, you got to. Sometimes we don't. But I'm not interested in justifiable. I'm interested in, was it inevitable? Did I do every single thing I could do to avoid that or to divert that, to create an off-ramp? And did it happen by me taking 90 seconds on a phone call to buy time that no one says I have? Did it happen because I said, these are my neighbors and not, us versus them? Did it happen because I saw them as my neighbors? Did it happen because I told myself, if I didn't have a badge and a gun, what would I do? How would I handle this call? It's all of those things. And so that's what I'm doing. I'm doing it with a bunch of good colleagues, and I'm sorry to ramble so long, but I think that I I think that everybody can do this. I think that everybody should do this. They shouldn't be like me. They should be like whatever they want to be, as long as they represent their community and they understand their neighbors. And that, I mean, police reform is coming. I tell everybody it's coming. It's needed. And a really expensive or inexpensive, because cities have no money, they've been devastated by this COVID, is how about this? Maybe start encouraging a neighbor mindset, which also includes maybe having them as your neighbors, maybe diversify how you hire. And so that's that in a nutshell, 40 minutes. I appreciate the time.
Patrick, thank you very much. That was fascinating. And you kind of said this at the end. You know, I've heard you in another interview said, if you were the chief of all policemen, that you do something actually quite simple, that you would change the language and you would change mindset. That in and of itself would go a long way. So you're an English major, I understand. So neighbor versus civilian matters to you. Serve and protect versus war on crime matters to you. Even these words like defund the police and all these others, these are all words that get loaded. And what you seem to be saying is, let's ratchet this down, and police are there to serve and protect their neighbors.
Yeah, and there are some, I mean, there are massive historical, systemic, current issues that are affecting not just the police, but every part of our society: racism, inequality. I can't hope to address that, but I can as an individual, of course. But what I can say is, if you change your mindset, if you change how the job is advertised, you might actually start getting different people, because you would start looking for people that are fitting this. And that doesn't mean you're looking for Mr. Rogers, but you know what? You might want a few more of them. Or you might want people that can take the 90 seconds, or the people that don't mind getting called terrible names for a couple minutes, because they understand it's not about them, and that they're the lucky ones. At the end of the day, they're lucky. I mean, I get to go home and have hot water, and yay. And so if you change the language, and I'm talking just literally change some of the training, you will change the people that are trying to apply, and then you're off and running.
That's interesting, because we just had a question from a professor who said, did your academic background in liberal arts shape your view of policing? And do you see an academic background in criminal justice being beneficial to police officers who might be thinking of the people they serve as neighbors? Is there, it sounds like you're talking about a sort of
Yeah.
education.
Yeah. I think that my English degree has been the most important thing I've ever had in my life. I just, I'm not pandering to those, but yeah, it is. I mean, because I don't know how I got hired by the CIA. I'm not being modest. I mean, 100,000 people applied. They took like under 100. I interviewed well, but it was because I thought in narrative, and I speak in narrative, and I write reports in narrative. And so I wrote pretty good agency reports, but also the reports were how I handled the meeting, and then how I handled the meeting, it's a feedback loop, changed how I handled the calls. And so when I train people now in the police, I'll say, you need to focus on what you need for the report, but in doing so, that's going to change the way you do the meeting. And being an English degree, I mean, a lot of cops with degrees have criminal justice. There's nothing wrong with that. I mean, I don't know if it makes them better or worse, but I do know that having a language degree or any kind of liberal arts or anything, anytime that you think of someone else, like, certainly, I mean, I was a creative writing major. That was what I wanted to be. And I still am, except I have to be factual and legal now. But I think that has helped me in every single job ever, except for maybe being an ocean lifeguard. But maybe help them. But anytime you can think with empathy, whatever that degree is that encourages empathy, I don't know what it is, we want more of that. It certainly has helped me.
Patrick, what support have you received from your higher ups in police departments? You're being vocal about this. You're doing things a different way in your own police department, or the feedback you've gotten from other police officers. Are you getting support for this, or are they going like, where is this guy coming from?
Yeah, I mean, I want to make it very clear that I'm not like this at work. I mean, I would be the most annoying, beat up person. I mean, I don't scold because I don't think I'm better than anybody. I just think I just happen to be slower, and I have different experiences. And I think, hey, why don't we try this? So at work, I'm not like this. I just focus on work. The higher ups are very aware. They've read the Washington postings. They actually set up the New Yorker article. I didn't set that up. And so they've been incredibly supportive. I mean, I haven't even been there 4 years. They put me through training. I mean, I'm a FLETC certified law enforcement instructor. I'm a state certified law enforcement instructor. They sent me there. I didn't even apply. They realized that I might be of use to them. So they've been very supportive. I've actually been asked to help, speak at a couple task force, I guess, or commissions that have been set up for increased civilian accountability. From the rank and file, they don't really know about it because I don't talk about it. I don't. They're aware of my background some, but I don't talk about that either. It's just, I think that I can make more influence by being how I think the job should be done every day, just as a training officer or just as a rookie detective. I'm very aware of my rookie status. And so I embrace it because I kind of learn every day. But the command staff has been incredibly supportive. I mean, I try to avoid them. I don't like to be taught, I don't like this. I mean, this is okay, but I'm a private public person.
Question from a listener. What do you think about community peace force wearing something identifiable armband who are trained to respond non-violently and are motivated to watch and respond? I think that maybe that's part of what some people are talking about when they talk about shifting the police budget around a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, so I'm not going to tell people what they mean when they say defund police, because some people mean defund the police. I mean, they literally mean abolish it. Whatever they want is fine by me. I don't know their experiences. I mean, people have reasons for whatever they believe. But I believe that defund the police, at least in my limited optic, means basically funding all the other things that would prevent the 911 call. By the time I'm sent to something, man, a lot of stuff has gone wrong for a long time, and we've shortchanged all of that. So refund everything else. So instead of focusing on the end of the 911 call, do something to prevent the 911 call. We are a 911 nation. We've encouraged everybody to see something, say something. Remember that war on terror? So if you see something, say something. We do the same thing in crime. If you see your neighbor falling down on the street, don't run over and talk to him, call 911 because he might be, scary or mentally ill or distressed. A lot of places have been doing it. It's getting more publicity, I guess, where they have crisis intervention teams. We were all trained in that too. But yeah, some places are doing like behavioral health units. We just set one up too, where they're not in uniform. They're still police officers, but other places take it to what you were talking about, where they have a clinician with somebody who's trained in de-escalation and stuff like that. I support that. The problem is there is no nuance in any discussion involving terrorism, because if you didn't support torture, then you supported them cutting your head off. And in policing, I have found, yes, there are trolls do exist, that if you said you shouldn't shoot everybody, that meant I want to be shot. And that people would always say, "Oh, good luck sending a social worker to a violent psychopath." Well, you wouldn't do that. Why would you? Whether you were a violent psychopath, that doesn't make any sense. So, I mean, and I tell everybody there are a lot of options between doing it wrong and doing nothing. And so I very much support anything that a community says, hey, how do we have less guns or less, if people want to bring the violence, they can, but how do we, the government, because we're responsible, we don't hold ourselves to the standards of the criminal, and we don't hold ourselves to the behavioral standards of people in mental distress. We should be okay here. Anything that we can do, any teams that you set up, any solutions or approaches that these communities do that lessen what we're seeing every day, I support, because man, we're going to need it more and more and more. I mean, there is a real need, because we are in mental health crisis, we're in economic crisis, we're in social crisis, political crisis. And at the end of that, the police got to respond to whatever that 911 call is. And so maybe have something other than the police respond to the 911 call.
It said, a listener says, it sounds like overseas, you were talking about the juxtaposition of your work in Iraq and Afghanistan, that you were focused on security rather than necessarily building up a civil society because there was no functional government. But do you see a need here to reinforce some civil society structures here in the U.S.? Where would you focus your attention?
I honestly don't know. I can barely know what I'm doing day to day. I just know that it's increasingly difficult to even have a conversation when we're not agreeing on gravity, like actual gravity, science, whatever it is. And if you assume everybody has not just a bad approach to something, but bad intent, so that they're not just misguided or perhaps wrong in what you believe, but they are actively against you. We do that in all discourse. There is no, I don't do politics, but I don't know how, but I do know that the police can take responsibility upon themselves to not make it worse. I honestly don't know how to make it better. I just know that I can't make it worse. And my job is to not make it worse.
Mm-hmm.
That was a terrible answer. I'm sorry. But I don't know how.
This militarization, we talked about budgeting things too. You said in one interview that, nobody seems to challenge the military budget, and they don't challenge the police budget either. That it's just okay, you need to spend a lot of money on the military, you need to spend a lot of money on the police, but it sounds like you're advocating for, let's get some nuance in there. What particular resources does the military need? What particular resources do the police need?
Yeah, or maybe if you could spend the money elsewhere on more people that would benefit, you would need to spend less for the police. I mean, I'm not advocating I take a pay cut, because we don't. I mean, I think I get paid $24 an hour. I mean, I don't make any money, but we have the money. I mean, we as a country, we have the money. I'm sorry, we do. At least at a federal level, cities are getting hammered. But it's not a matter of funding; it's a matter of priorities. And yeah, I mean, if you not just, I mean, we're not even talking cutting the police budgets or the military budgets. They're just talking about like slowing the rate of increase. If you just kept it the same, that means you're a communist and you want everyone to be killed. And so that it's hard to have a discussion about that. But I believe that, yes, we need to have a honest adult conversation, and every community should have that, where maybe it's not an attack on the police if we say, hey, we think we can cut down the 911 calls by doing this. Now, look, I believe that we should have less police, but you can't do that unless you have less 911 calls. I mean, I was just out helping patrol today, and 12-hour shifts, they are writing call to call to call to call. It is not fun. It is a grind. They call it a grind for a reason, because it is. They are overwhelmed because, as I said, we're a 911 nation. People call 911 for everything. The current setup is the police respond to all 911 calls. Whatever we can do to reduce the 911 calls, or the options at the end of that 911 call, but preferably reduce the need for the 911 calls, you would need less police. Right now, if you just said, hey, we need less police, and you just cut that, you would have some major crime issues. You would have some major problems, because those social issues or whatever is driving those 911 calls, crime included, but remember, most crimes, I bet 75% of 911 calls aren't crime. They're near crime. They're trending to crime. Police can kind of show up, maybe make it, or somebody, how about that, can show up and not make it crime. Our job is to not push it into crime. So the 75% aren't crime, but we're responsible for 100% of it. If you lowered the number of police officers without lowering the need for those police officers, you would have some problems. I think the communities that understand that will do the best. And I certainly think that the police departments that understand that we operate with the consent of our neighbors. We don't tell them how we're going to do our job. They tell us why and how to do the job. The police departments that understand that, the local governments that understand that there are ways to move money around, they're going to do the best. The police departments that hunker down and say, thin blue line, you hate us. If you don't support us 100%, you're anti-police. They're going to do poorly. And the communities are suffering.
Somebody was asking about how police officers are feeling these days, because they're getting a lot of criticism. Somebody wrote in this acronym ACAB. Yeah. You've heard that. You've heard
all cops are bastards.
You've heard much worse. How is this? What's the morale of police today? How are they reacting to the intensity of the conversation?
I mean, I remember like when the agency, so I was at the agency in 2003, right when the WMD debacle was, coming clear, and people were like, "Oh, don't criticize the agency." I remember like when George Tenet, who was a great boss, was removed, and there was legitimate criticism. I mean, there should have been criticism, and people were like, "Oh, well, no, the morale at the agency is going to suffer." But what are you talking about? I mean, that's 40,000 people, and I mean, my personal morale is not tied to like, oh, people in the country think that the CIA as a whole missed 9/11. Well, one, I was standing in the U.S. Capitol during 9/11. Don't blame me. But I didn't. It never bothered me, and I never understood that like we can't be criticized because my morale would stink. That's like telling me you're not allowed to tell me my breath stinks because I might have to go brush my teeth. Yeah, that's the whole point. Tell me my breath stinks so I can brush my teeth. And so collectively, as an organization, police need to be told to breast stink. How about that? I don't speak for my colleagues. Again, I barely speak for myself. My morale is not dependent on what people think of policing in general. It is entirely dependent on how they think I treat it.
In the protests that have been going on, I've heard you talk a little bit about that too, that, it's the rioters versus the protesters, and that has blown this whole discussion into, again, a polarization. You're letting the rioters do their thing. They're hurting people. What about the protesters? Don't we have a right in this country to protest?
Yeah.
And the police are in the middle of this,
That's awful. And I'm going to tell everybody in this audience, every community, Grand Rapids, Savannah, doesn't matter. We're all one. In the way things are now, we are all one video away. I'll just flat out say it. It doesn't matter. Philadelphia had issues last night. I'm pretty sure the mayor of Kenosha, the day before that they exploded in riots, probably said, we have a pretty good feel of what's going on in this community. No, even the best run cities, because the police department is part of that run city, local governments have to be responsive. They have to be accountable. Police departments are a large part of that. Even the best run cities, they're one video away. The best run cities will recover fast. But man, the time for nuance and all that dialogue, when that riot starts, it's too late. It's too late. I mean, you can mitigate with tactics, and the police do sometimes. I mean, I've seen it just like everyone else, where they make it worse. But when rioters make it worse, I mean, intent on violence, it all falls apart. I mean, the protesters, their legitimate concerns, their rights get washed away. The police who are getting hit with stuff and shot at or whatever, they're going to respond. And I mean, the time for nuance is lost in the riot. The whole point is to do whatever you can to avoid that damn riot. But more importantly, because understanding we're all one video away, is to do every single thing you can to prevent that by having a transparent, demonstrated record of not treating people like crap, of a transparent of holding people accountable when they do. And then you will be able to recover faster from the inevitable drama.
A couple more questions. We're keeping you a little bit overtime, Patrick, but I knew that there'd be such intense interest in this. Police unions came up in a conversation, and you're in a police union, I imagine?
Nope.
No, you're not. Savannah doesn't have a union?
No, this is the South. No, of course not. No. So, and it's funny because I'm a pro-union person. I believe that the unions help build the middle class. I support unions. I like a 40-hour week. I like environmental protections and health regulations and pay protections. I like that. And if I was not in a police capacity, I would really want to be in a union. I am not pro-police union. I mean, I'm not anti, but I'm certainly, well, maybe I am, because I think that the rights of my neighbors outweigh my employment rights. Their civil rights, their safety rights, their every rights outweigh my employment rights. They do. And I have the power of the state. So I shouldn't be able to collectively bargain with my neighbor's rights, because that's where the accountability issue comes in. I see some of the garbage that comes out of very high profile police union spokesmen where they're calling their elected officials, the people that they work for in theory, losers or whatever you want to call them, socialists. I was like, wow, that's a weird term. I haven't heard that in a while. But or that they're calling the people that are protesting animals and, thugs. And again, what you say is what you think. What you think is what you do. If the police union, the people that the police have said, we want them to represent us, if they are publicly saying that their neighbors, which they're not their neighbors, they're us versus them, they're scum, they're saying that kind of stuff, then I don't want anything to do with that. I wouldn't be part of that police. I would try to find, I just wouldn't be a police officer there. I'll say that. I support unions. I don't support police unions. I believe that there is a role, and we have to have fairness. I need, my rights, my employment rights to be protected, but not at the expense, or certainly not at the luxury of me being held accountable. Like, mistakes happen. Yes, of course they do. Of course they do. But a pattern of mistakes, that should be held accountable. And unions make that difficult, police unions.
Last question or just comment, Patrick. You've been to Grand Rapids. You've been in Fine City. Your aunt lives here. You know the place well. What advice do you have? Grand Rapids. Oh, there's one of your buddies.
One of them, yeah.
What advice do you have for us here in Grand Rapids and West Michigan? You know the conversations that are going on. You know that they're the same conversations that similar to what you're having in Savannah. Give we folks in West Michigan and Grand Rapids some perspective from yourself on what's happening right now.
I remember being impressed by Grand Rapids. I thought that it had a neighborhood feel. I mean, I was in a neighborhood, so it did have that feel. But now it's a self-selecting audience because I was talking with you people. So I mean, you're a self-selecting, engaged audience. I'm increasingly understanding that the target audience that we might be thinking about trying to reach aren't on this website right now. They're not watching this, but they are as important, if not more. I think that times are tough, and they're going to get a lot worse, I think. But I think that if we all understand, and it sounds so hokey, but I've come up with this motto, and I ended one of the stupid op-eds with it, where I believe that we all matter or none of us do. And I always get choked up when I think of it because it's true. And I would tell Grand Rapids the same thing I would tell everyone in Savannah, the same thing I would tell people in New Jersey, or when I lived in DC, or wherever it is, anybody who can hear this. We all matter or none of us do. And that's not a slogan. It's the truth. And whatever job you do, my job is police, but whatever your job you do, understand that we all matter or none of us do, and then go from there.
Great. Thank you, Patrick. Thank you very much for being with us. It's been a delight. We felt like we've gotten to know you. 4 years ago, you were with us, and here again, so much has happened, and we've been watching your career with interest. We'll continue to do that. You can follow Patrick on Twitter at PatrickPM. And we want to thank you for being with us today and asking great questions. We will archive this conversation. It'll be on our YouTube World Michigan channel. So if you think somebody that needs to hear this, needs to hear what Patrick has to say and engage in some dialogue, go to that site. And we're going to continue to provide you with programming during these days of physical distancing. And we're up next again on Tuesday, November 10 at 7 p.m. for the annual installment of Chinatown Hall. And we will be examining the current state of U.S.-China relations. And we'll be doing a follow-up the next day on November 11 with a local China roundtable. You can register at worldmichigan.com/fall 2020. Thank you for joining us. Be sure to vote and stay safe and well. And we encourage you to keep striving to be world aware. Take care.
Thank you.